With the boring base coats out of the way, it is time to bring out the oil paints to create super smooth shadows and highlights. But before that, an overall application mixing black and green will lay the groundwork for any further steps. What you are seeing is not your typical oil wash but a thicker application. A couple of drops of solvent were added to the mix, but as you can see, the paint behaves as an opaque layer which doesn't run into the recesses. Quick side note when mixing oil paints. If you see a lot of oil separated from the pigment, leave it on a piece of cardboard to absorb any excess, before transferring it to your mixing dish. Once the model is completely covered, I waited a couple minutes for the small amount of solvent I mixed in to evaporate, before doing a bit of cleanup using a makeup sponge. Two things will happen here. On one hand, the sponge will remove the paint from the raised details and flatter areas, leaving the darker color on the recesses or shadow areas. At the same time, a thin layer of oil will be left behind over the cleaned areas, as you can see by the greenish color left behind over the lighter base tones. And while I could completely clean it using a bit of solvent, for now I want the thin layer of oil to be there in order to help me work with lighter colors moving on. While the sponges are not reusable, I usually cut them into multiples to get the most out of them. Also, for any hard to reach areas or delicate details, an eyeshadow applicator comes in handy. Once I was done with the cleaning, some streaks of dark were looking a bit messy, but it is nothing a clean soft brush cannot help me blend, and what you are seeing now is all the brush technique you'll be needing moving forward. What I am doing now is dispersing the dark pigments throughout that oily groundwork I created, to create a smooth transition away from where the paint built up. This is also a good opportunity to mention that as we blend oil paints, some of the paint will be picked up by the brush, so to avoid any smudges from paint building up, remember to clean the brush on a paper towel every once in a while. Now it is time to take this blending method or simply dry brushing and use it to create highlights. Though after mixing in a bit of yellow for brightness and white for opacity, the oils look to be having some trouble blending. That is because the brush I'm using is saturated with paint. So to go from a messy finish to a more cohesive result, a new brush is required. My initial brush will be exclusively used for application over the areas I want to highlight and nothing else. Meanwhile, a new clean brush will be used to take that color and blend it around the area it was applied, to create a seamless transition of color. If you enjoy wet blending acrylics, working with oils is the exact same thing, but without any rush when it comes to time, as it'll take hours for them to fully dry. Only thing to be mindful of is that just as before, the brush will begin to pick up paint. So to keep the brush clean and with its blending properties on point, remember to clean it on a paper towel every 2 or 3 blends. As I look to create smaller highlights, not only do I apply less paint, but I also help myself by grabbing a smaller brush and using it to blend around the more tricky areas. Also, don't shy away from adding a pinch of dark color to any shadows you want to enhance and blending them in the same manner. If you see that the paint doesn't blend too well, that is because there is too much paint on the surface, just as is happening here. But don't worry, blend a little, clean on a paper towel and blend a little more. Remember that as the brush blends, it is also picking up paint. If I were to insist on blending this much paint, I would have to extend the transition too much. And by the way, don't worry about any undesired areas getting covered up in oil. I'll be dealing with that in a little and it's gonna be super easy. When working with oils, take advantage of their slow drying time and relax. Smooth blends are extremely easy to achieve, and we are free to enhance any lights or shadows at any point. It is up to you how much time and effort you want to put into the paint job, and not so much if you have the skill to do it or not. This is as far as I'll go with my blends, as I have something to test out at the end. Time to address the overspill, which will be as simple as brushing some solvent over the areas I want to clean. As the oil dilutes, it will run into the recesses and mix with the initial darker tone to create shadows. Still, I have a paper towel at hand to unload excess diluted paint the brush picks up, similar to how we would pay attention to paint pooling as with any regular acrylic wash. Once I was done cleaning, I left the model to dry overnight, and at this point the model was finished, but I decided to add just a couple extra details. Starting with some quick highlights on any eye-catching details. Nothing special, just a couple lines and dots here and there, which took me no more than 2 or 3 minutes. As well as some diluted washes, which would not have that big of an impact anywhere, but on the more pronounced recesses. Finally, I applied a gloss varnish over all of the cube. On one hand, my plan was to make it look wet, which would create a natural surface finish contrast. At the same time, and the reason why I didn't push the highlights of the cube more, was that the natural light reflection the glossy finish would create would give me some natural tabletop highlights, so the extra work was unnecessary. In the end, I didn't like what it did to the finished result, and that is mainly because my application of the varnish was very poor, both filled with bubbles as well as very uneven. Still, I hope you found the lesson in oil paints and the main focus of this video both interesting and helpful. And if you have any questions about it, let us discuss it in the comments. As always, thank you for watching.